In this video, we're going to take our first real look at building a tool in Houdini. Now, we're back here with our friendly particle setup, and you'll notice that I've cleaned it up a little bit. I've renamed a few nodes, I've added this network box here, and this visualization node, I just made it black because it's hanging off the tree, and we want to keep it there, but we don't actually, it's not actually being used by the setup or referenced anywhere. So I just colored it black so that it's pretty clear that that's what it is. And since it's called visualize control field, it's pretty obvious what's going on, I think. And if we play it, it looks something like this. Okay, so something that I would like you guys to notice is that if we change our control field attribute, so if we tell it to be like 10, for instance, it actually controls how much the particles explode. And that's because we are transferring this number directly onto the grid and then multiplying it directly against our velocity. So we can actually use this attribute to control not just where the particles are, but how much they shoot out. And there's no reason why we can't use this with multiple particles, or with multiple control points. So suppose that I did this. So let's just make this network box a little bit bigger, and we can create a merge node. Move this one down, stick this guy in. So if we grab all three of these nodes, the add, the transform, and the control field, we can copy them with Control C and paste them with Control V and plug them into the merge. And then if we grab this second transform SOP that we just made, and in the viewport we can just move the control point over. Now we can use the other point, the other point's control field attribute, maybe make it like 2. How far the particles shoot up in that part of the grid. So if we hit play, you'll notice that they shoot up a lot more on this side of the grid than they do on this side of the grid. So we can actually use our control points as a very visual way to say, I want lots of particles shooting way high over here, and then lots of particles over here, but they don't want to shoot nearly as much. So the weird thing about this is that every time I want to add a new control point, I have to copy these 3 nodes. And what's worse is that I need to know what these 3 nodes are. So it'd be kind of nice if we could just have one node that represents a control point, and it already did all of these things for us. And here's where we build our first tool. So the way that Houdini solves this problem is by creating what's called an operator type library, which is a huge mouthful, so we just abbreviate it to OTL. An OTL is simply a collection of nodes that represents a tool in Houdini. So if we want to create our first OTL, select the nodes that you want to have in your OTL. In this case, we want all 3 of these. We want the add node, we want the transform node, and we want the attribute create node. So all 3 nodes that we use to make up a control point. Now we can either hit this little button that looks like a box here, or we can press Shift C. You'll notice that we created a subnet. So a subnet is a node that contains other nodes. It doesn't really do anything on its own. So if we double click on it, we can see that all the nodes that we had before are inside that subnet now. And in fact, since they're in a different level, I can even strip off the numbers on the ends of the nodes. And that gives us just a little bit cleaner named nodes. So if we come back out, it's probably a good idea for us to name this something meaningful like control point. And notice that when Houdini collapsed those nodes into a subnet, it didn't actually put the subnet inside my network box here. So the way that you can fix that is you just drag it outside the network box and put it down, and then drag it back in and put it down. And now you'll notice that it's inside the network box. Alright, so this is a subnet, but it's not quite an OTL yet. So let's create an OTL out of this. So if we just grab this guy and right click on him, there's this create digital asset menu option. Now, digital asset is just another name for OTL. So if we click on that, it gives us this little dialog here. By default, it puts your name into the name of the operator. I would like for you guys to delete that. And the reason for that is that one of the points of creating an OTL is so that other people can use them. And if your name is in it, then it doesn't really make sense in the context of the setup. So I don't really know why it does that. Okay, so we'll look at the difference between the name and the label a little bit later. But the main thing to know is that this name that you're putting here is the actual type name of the node. So if you're creating a point stop, for example, the type of that is point. So this is what this is. We can change the number of inputs, but we're not going to mess with that right now. We'll do that later. And then we can choose where on disk it's actually saved to. So by default, it puts it somewhere in your documents. I'm just going to put it whoops. Yeah, OTLs. And then I'm just going to put it in my Houdini class OTLs folder that I have created. You can put it anywhere on disk, it doesn't matter. Just put it somewhere that makes sense. Okay, so, and then usually I call the file the same thing as the name, so it's really easy to tell what's inside it. So we'll call it something like control point.otl. One thing to note here is that it's very important to keep this extension on here, because Houdini will not automatically put that on there if you hit save. And if you don't have the .otl extension on there, Houdini won't actually recognize it later. So it's very important to leave that there. Hit accept, and then if we hit accept again, you'll notice that it brings up this type properties dialog. And you'll also notice that in your network editor, all of the inputs disappeared, and those 4 parameters that we had here before when it was a subnet disappeared. So this is no longer a subnet, this is actually an OTL, and it's our first actual tool. So we'll deal with this dialog a little bit later. For now, just hit accept, and we're good to go. Now you'll notice if I go back inside here, it's still got just these 3 nodes that we had in here. So not a whole lot has changed at this point, and even if I hit play, you can see that it's still doing the same thing, but there's one very notable difference. And that is, if we go to the tab menu, where it says digital assets here, there's a new one. And that is our control point node. So if we click on it and put it down, and we dive inside, look at that, it's our 3 nodes. So now you could say that we have this tool called control point that makes a control point for our setup. And indeed, we could even go over here and delete all of these nodes. So that was just deleting the same nodes that are inside the setup, or the add node, the transform node, and the create node. Wire him back in over here, and then dive inside this node to change where the position of the control point is, and oops, none of these parameters are changeable. They're all grayed out. Why are they all grayed out? Okay, so the reason for that is if we come back up out of the control point OTL, do you notice how this one, its name is blue, and this one, its name is in red? So OTLs has this concept called locking, and what that means is that when an OTL is locked, you can't go inside and make any changes, and this is actually a good thing, because an OTL is really intended to be a self-contained tool that you never need to go inside and edit. So the reason why this one is red and this one's blue is because this OTL is actually what's called unlocked, and that's because we created it, and this is what Houdini thinks we want to use to edit it. So if we dive inside this node, you'll notice that nothing's grayed out, and I can change all of these. If we come back out, fortunately, it's pretty easy if we want to actually change things in there. So what you can do is you can grab this node, right click, and then say allow editing of contents right here. That's another way of saying unlock the OTL. And now notice that the text here turned red, like this one, and that tells us that we can edit whatever's inside. So if I go inside here, now if I hit enter, we can just move this point over here, maybe move it over here. And now if we come back out, once again, we have our particles there. So now if I hit play, it's the same as the other one, so we need to go back inside and change this one to be like 5. And then come back out and see what happens to our particles. So now, if we want to add another control point, we just hit tab and type control point. And plug it in. Right click, say allow editing of contents, dive inside, move the control point, come back out, and just hit play.